Okay, so here we go. Hello and welcome to the online meeting for the 27th Street Railroad Crossing in Billings. Thank you for joining us. I'm Lisa Gray, the Public Involvement Lead for HDR. During this meeting, members of the Montana Department of Transportation and the project team will share study details and respond to your questions. The presentation and question and answer session will allow us to engage with you and provide the latest information about the study. As a reminder, today's session is being recorded, and a copy of this meeting and the presentation will be posted on the project's webpage next week. Now it's time to get going. I'm going to turn the meeting over to Curtis, who will start our team introductions and then discuss MDT's Vision Zero.
Thank you, Lisa, and good morning, everyone. I'm Curtis Schneeber with the Montana Department of Transportation. I'm the acting Billings District Pre-Construction Engineer. Our acting district administrator, Mike Taylor, wanted to be here but had other commitments. Sean, would you introduce yourself next?
Hi, I'm Sean Sampson. I'll be the project manager for NDT's Consultant Design Bureau.
And I am Tim Erickson with HDR, project manager for this project.
Hi, I'm Chris Bramer from Kittleson Associates. We're providing traffic engineering services for the project.
And Lisa, would you introduce yourself again?
Thank you. The mute button and I are not best friends today. You met me earlier. I'm Lisa Gray, the HDR Public Involvement Lead.
Thanks, Lisa. Now I want to take a minute to briefly discuss a strategy that MDT adopted on all our roadways in Montana. It's called Vision Zero. Vision Zero is a strategy to eliminate all traffic fatalities and serious injuries while increasing safety and mobility for all roadway users. Tragically, in 2021, there were 240 fatalities on Montana highways. As of December 5th of this year, 188 lives have been lost. To eliminate fatalities and serious injuries on the roads in Montana, we need everyone to do their part. We need everyone to be attentive. We need everyone to drive sober. We need everyone to drive to the conditions of the roadway and not to speed. We need everyone to watch out for pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorcycles. And finally, we need everyone to use their seatbelts. Together, we can make a difference and save lives. With that, I want to say thank you for joining us today, and thank you for participating in this important process. Before we get into the project specifics, you will again hear from Lisa, who will discuss more about the Q&A format for this virtual meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Curtis. A question and answer session will be held immediately following the presentation. Feel free to write your questions now or at any time during the presentation, and we will answer your questions live after the PowerPoint presentation concludes. To participate in the question and answer session, locate the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen, click the button, which is highlighted in green on the PowerPoint, type your question, and remember to hit send. I'm going to turn it over to the MDT project manager for the 27th Street Railroad Crossing Study. Sean, take it away.
Thanks, Lisa. So I'm going to try and reset the stage for this project and talk a little bit about its purpose. If you reference the map on your screen, you'll notice that 27th Street runs generally northwest to southeast across downtown Billings. Running perpendicular and intersecting 27th is the BNSF Railroad, aligned right between Montana Avenue and Minnesota Avenue. The point of intersection is what we call at grade, meaning that trains that come through the area are on the same level as the roadway user, and the roadway user movements are halted at this location until the train has gone by. Some quick facts about this crossing location. It's one of the busiest at-grade rail crossings in the state of Montana, with roughly 32 train crossings and 6 switching operations per day. As you can imagine, these crossing events cause an impact to downtown Billings, congestion, impact to emergency services, driver frustration, and overall a decreased downtown user experience are a few. This leads the department to take a closer look and study the area to identify some potential solutions by way of a planning study. I will hand it off to Tim Erickson, HDR's project manager, to talk more about the specifics of the planning study. Tim?
Thanks, Sean. So this study has been ongoing since 2018. And really what springboarded this study overall was a statewide at-grade crossing study that the Montana Department of Transportation completed in 2016. That study had identified the 27th Street rail crossing as one of the top crossings in the state that could benefit from some sort of improvements to overall enhancements to mobility and safety. So with this study, we are taking a ground level look and applying engineering concepts and principles to this crossing itself, as well as incorporating ideas and potential impacts for the 28th or Broadway crossing, as well as the 29th Street crossings. With this study, we have identified short-term and long-term improvement solutions. How we have defined those is a short-term solution would keep the crossing at grade as it is today, just like Sean described, with the railroad tracks and the roadway at the same level. Those could include some signal modifications or additional advanced warning signs and information for motorists and users. Long-term are defined as more capital investment types of projects, such as an overpass or an underpass. An overpass would be where the roadway would go over the railroad tracks, and an underpass or a tunnel, the roadway would go underneath the railroad tracks. So throughout the study, we want to vet each of the different solutions through a transparent decision process. Going out to the public and various stakeholder outreach, such as today's meeting, we've been able to receive feedback and input from various users and incorporate that feedback into our study. Ultimately, this will determine what should and could be implemented to improve mobility and safety for the crossing. So here's a summary of the overall stakeholder engagement that has occurred for this study since 2018. This is our 4th round of public meetings. As you can see on the screen, the various public meetings that have occurred. And we also have a lot of ongoing stakeholder outreach, business owner outreach, outreach with DBA, the city, the county, city council, as well as emergency response personnel. Off to the right-hand side of the screen, you can see some of the comments that have been received so far. So in particular for long-term alternatives, so again, the overpass or an underpass, since those have been presented at previous public meetings, we have received comments such as they are expensive, potential negative impacts to businesses and homes, divides the downtown, really want to focus in on not impacting historic district. And also, as you may see later on in the presentation, the overpass and underpass alternatives have not had dedicated pedestrian or bicyclist accommodations with them. In particular for an overpass, so again, the roadway over the railroad tracks, some of the feedback that has been received to date is that it would change the downtown too much, such as casting shadows and impacting the view shed, and also has created negative change in other cities that have had overpasses constructed before. For a tunnel or an underpass option, where the road goes underneath the railroad tracks, there's concern about the high water levels, with the underpass being actually lower than the existing groundwater. And then what to do with drainage and potential ice issues in the wintertime, potentially creating safety hazards. A few of the comments that have been received for the short-term alternatives, which again is defined as keeping the crossing at grade as it is today, is that these are great ideas and hopefully they would help emergency response times. ITS, which is Intelligent Transportation Systems, that technology continues to evolve and we should use it for this crossing. 21st century technology can solve these problems. So with that feedback, we are going to present some additional information that we have looked at and progress towards solutions for the study. On this slide, you will see a summary of the long-term alternatives, which has been the overpass and a tunnel option. So off on the right-hand side, you see images or renderings that represent an overpass in the upper right and a tunnel on the lower right. In both situations, what we have done is looked at many solutions, including all lanes, meaning 4 lanes going over or under. And those would just sever the connectivity to downtown. And so where we have landed with this study and has been presented at previous public meetings is a single lane of traffic in each direction, either going over or under the tracks. This also means that a single lane in each direction for traffic would maintain at grade and provide connectivity to the downtown. So as we look at various evaluation criteria to help prioritize and create a short list, if you will, of various alternatives, both the overpass and the tunnel meet design standards, current design standards, overall meet project goals of improving safety and mobility of the crossing, enhances traffic mobility and route connectivity, and also has some benefits for multimodal connectivity. For neither of the alternatives meet criteria for the outcomes of the study based on the stakeholder interest and outreach that has occurred so far and the feedback we've received, overall potential impacts to properties and businesses as well as business access, and then also just the overall capital costs, which are much higher than the short-term alternatives. So something to note since the last public outreach that has occurred as we look to finalize the study is both of these long-term alternatives will be retained in the study, but there is not a plan to move either one of these options forward at this time. So as I mentioned, through that engagement with the city, the public, and other stakeholders, our project team has decided to take a much closer look at some of the short-term alternatives, in particular with ITS, that could help make improvements for this crossing. And now Chris is going to go into some of those details of what we have looked at for those options.
Thank you, Tim. What I'm going to do is walk the group through 2 distinct options, one working with the existing signal system and one looking at some of that new intelligent transportation system technology that we're seeing evolve. For both of these alternatives, we looked at the same evaluation criteria that you see here on the right. And essentially, we're trying to make sure, one, we're keeping the network whole, we're serving the community and the stakeholder interests, meeting project goals, providing that connectivity for not only cars, but also people walking and biking, and really trying to do the best we can to manage the transportation system with the infrastructure that's there, short of a grade separation project. We'll, with the next slide, walk through the traffic signal options that are available to us. And essentially, we looked at 2 different options. And Gina, if you could switch us to the next slide, please. What we're trying to do is basically build on the traffic signal system that's in place today. Those of you that live and commute this corridor know that MDT invested in new signals and infrastructure along 27th in the last couple of years. And now we're trying to see, are there ways to further fine tune and improve on what we have? So one of the first ideas is to potentially deal with traffic during the time when the rail crossing is blocked in a different way. And this relates to the picture you see here on the right. The image you're looking at is facing 27th Street on Montana, heading east, so continuing towards 21st and connections beyond. To the right of the building you see is the railroad main line, and so the trains are running parallel to us. And what happens when a train blocks the crossing is as you know, if you've driven this, if you're on Montana Avenue, first couple cars may be able to turn right and wait at the rail crossing. But after that, essentially the block between the rail crossing and Montana fills up and there's nowhere to turn onto 27th Street. So one of the ideas that we've put forth is to not allow that right turn movement when the train's going through. And to accomplish that, what we're suggesting is putting up what we call a blank out sign or part-time restriction sign, lots of technical terms, but it's basically an electronic sign that is dark until we turn the message on. And that message that would come on when a train going by is that no right turns are allowed, and we'd encourage people to instead just go straight so they're not blocking traffic. In conjunction with that, we would likely be putting up some signing directing people to instead use the undercrossings at 21st or 13th so that they know there's an alternative and where they could go to instead. We think this has some potential real benefits, not only for this intersection here at 27th, but it could also extend just to the west and be used at the other two crossings if in fact it's successful. In addition to the right turn treatment, one of the issues that historically has been a challenge for drivers at this intersection is if you're heading south on 27th and the rail crossing's blocked, you historically couldn't turn left onto Montana to take a different route. MDT has recently changed the traffic signal so that southbound left turn can occur during a rail preemption when the crossing's blocked. And they've also started letting pedestrians cross north-south so that they can get across Montana Avenue and continue up or down 27th Street. There are some subtle changes we think that could be made to further enhance that operation. And we understand, separate from this project, the city itself is considering some changes to the east-west streets north of Montana, potentially converting from one-way to two-way. As those network changes happen, we want to understand what the impact is on this left turn movement and just make sure we're keeping the system operating in a holistic manner. So essentially, again, building on the signal that's there today and trying to use it more efficiently. Switching to the next slide, we're going to talk a little through the alternative of potentially using some of that technology to better alert you, the motorist, that there's a train not only blocking the crossing, but potentially blocking it for an extended time. The image you see below is one of the signs that's out on 27th Street today. If you've driven the corridor, you're probably very familiar with it. When the railroad crossing gates are down, the lights come on and basically tell you that the crossing's blocked. That's helpful. It's something that the community requested in the past, and it provides drivers information, but it doesn't tell you anything about how long the crossing will be blocked. There is emerging technology that's becoming proven now in use across the US and Canada that is allowing departments of transportation, cities to essentially detect a train approaching a crossing and predict how long that train will occupy or block the crossing. We think that technology shows a lot of promise here, where we essentially could be watching for trains coming from the west or the east. And if those trains look like they're going to be, for example, blocking the crossing for more than 5 minutes, essentially alert you, the driver, that, hey, this train's going to take longer and you might want to consider an alternative route. In concept, what we've looked at doing is adding another one of these blank out signs that would only come on when the train's going to be there, for example, longer than 5 minutes or a defined duration, so that you as a driver would have that information and could make your own decision of, do you want to try to find an alternative route or just sit and wait? That is something that we think shows a lot of promise, and we're seeing other applications across the country where it has worked well. This setting is unique. As Sean mentioned at the beginning, there's 32 trains plus 6 switching moves. Those switching moves, if you've lived and driven the corridor, you know sometimes they come in, they stop, they back up. Some things happen unique. So this technology needs to be tested and make sure it's really going to work in this setting, but we think it has a lot of promise. And I'm going to turn it back to Tim to talk now about next steps.
So the plan overall is for the overall study of this crossing to be wrapped up by the end of this year. And this presentation has given a high-level summary of that. But in particular, as we look at potential next steps, based on the information on the ITS and the signal upgrades that Chris just described, we have identified 3 potential next steps. And a lot of this is going to be based on additional feedback and input from the public, from the stakeholders and others, to potentially see what the community wants to see moving forward. So one of those ideas is to conduct a pilot study of that ITS technology that Chris just described for the excessive delay warning system. The importance of the pilot study is to be able to do the test, be able to put in temporary infrastructure to see how it works and how successful it can be at this crossing. It might be for 9 months, a year, possibly even 2 years. As the system is in place, it has some automatic learning in its abilities to enhance itself through the technology that it's using to kind of get smarter at the longer that it sits into a specific crossing. This would also allow the Montana Department of Transportation, the project team, and the community to see where different sign locations or different information might be the most successful. And then if that is successful, could potentially lead to a future project where permanent infrastructure would be put in place with that technology. One of the other potential next steps would be to install a no right turn blankout sign. And that is again on the signal at 27th Street and Montana for eastbound Montana right turning. And then also to look at additional enhancements to the existing signal at 27th and Montana for implementing overall left turn recalls and improvements to that to be able to continue flowing traffic when the crossing is blocked. So that wraps up our presentation for today with a focus on the additional efforts that have been put forth on this study since the last time we came out to the public. And now I'm going to turn it over to Lisa, and she'll describe how you all can stay engaged and submit comments for this project.
Thank you, Tim. And thank you, team. That was a great presentation. Now we're going to open the meeting to questions. Remember to participate in the question and answer session. Locate the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. Click the button, type your question, and then submit it. If you don't submit it, we can't see it. Thanks so much for joining us. As Tim said on the screen, you can see how to comment and stay involved. If you have questions or concerns, please feel free to comment me and I'll make sure that information gets to the project team. We currently have no questions on our question and answer board. So if you have questions about anything you heard from us, oh, they're coming in. Hang on a second. Okay, the first question is, do you have any solutions other than putting up a sign? So I'm going to send this to Tim first, and he can answer that for us.
Yeah, you bet. So with this study, we have looked at lots of different options. So looked at a lot of different short-term, where does it make the most sense for additional advanced warning signs for short-term, also signal enhancements, and then also looked at pretty much any type of overpass or underpass for the crossing. And as the project has progressed, we've really narrowed down the potential for success of this crossing that would meet the outcomes that are desired outcomes from the community based on what we have presented today. So that is the potential next steps based on, the feedback that has been received to date with all the information that has been researched and provided for this study.
And Tim, the next one's for you as well. Could the railroad be moved below grade?
So there was a study, I forget which year it was completed. It was at least 20 years ago. That did look specifically at railroad, I think it was called over, under, and around. This specific project, based on being funded by the Montana Department of Transportation, focused on public infrastructure only. The biggest driver for which creates issues with trying to do anything with the tracks is its proximity to yards on either side of 27th Street, as well as the various industry connections as we move further east and west. So any grade changes on the railroad really negatively impacts overall operations of the railroad, as well as its ability to serve businesses and industries along the tracks. And so this study did not look at all of moving of anything with the railroad tracks. And the Montana Rail Link has been a key stakeholder and partner on this project as well, and really focused in on the opportunities that we have with public infrastructure.
Thank you, Tim. The next question I'm going to send to Tim, and if you think Chris would add to it, just go ahead and pass it to him too. And the question is, are you looking at improvements at the 13th and 22nd tunnel crossings?
So the statewide study that was completed in 2016 did look at the 13th crossing. That one does currently meet legal load height requirements. And so that one definitely has a better vertical clearance for emergency services in particular, as well as other users of the roadway. So this study did not include anything on 13th because the previous study had kind of addressed potentials there. The other crossing, I believe it's at 21st Street, does have a substandard or a much lower vertical clearance that many emergency services are unable to utilize that undercrossing. So there has been discussion of potentially the city looking at that crossing for potential improvements in the future to at least be able to cross or have emergency services cross that underpass there at 21st Street. And one of the distinctions there and why the city might look at that is 21st is a city owned and maintained roadway, where 27th is an MDT maintained roadway. And so we have been in coordination and collaboration with the city for potentials on 21st Street.
Thank you, Tim. The next two questions are about the railroad. And I think Tim provided us a fulsome answer from the railroad's involvement and perspective. So I'm going to go ahead and skip the next two questions. But if our anonymous attendee or Christy want to rephrase the railroad question, unless I'm missing something, please let me know. The next question is, how soon could the pilot study be implemented? Tim, that'll go to you first, and then Chris if needed.
Yeah, you bet. And I'd like if Curtis has any additional information. So there is not a project that is currently funded for improvements on this. However, we are receiving some good. We had a public meeting in person on Monday evening for this project and have had some positive feedback in regards to the pilot study. And so we are reaching out with the various vendors with the technology to determine how much a pilot study could cost. And we want to provide that information to MDT, and then they would need to look at various funding opportunities to utilize that and implement a pilot study with that. But at this time, one is not planned on being implemented. Curtis, you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you covered it well, Tim. I depending on the outcome of this and the comments we receive, I think we're moving forward with that very thing. And I believe it doesn't seem like it'd be a huge funding obstacle to be able to do that and to also move forward with the design project.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a question then. Chris, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but how long do these type of studies generally take? Is it 3 months, a year? What do you guys do?
So my understanding, it's a great question, Lisa. In terms of the technology, there is now technology that's available that's essentially off the shelf. So what we would be doing is working with the vendor to define exactly where to put the equipment. And then really, once it's in the field, which can be done in fairly short order, my understanding is it takes about a month of the equipment in the field to basically observe trains, learn their patterns, and start developing those predictive abilities. I would from there anticipate that the actual implementation project, is, I think Tim alluded to earlier, probably would be on the ground for 9 months to a year, possibly longer, to essentially, one, verify that the technology works and how well it works, but then two, is we potentially look to test different sign locations, observe how does the public respond to that. Is that helpful? Is there maybe we move a sign up a block or two? Does that change people's reactions? And so I think the pilot study can be geared to, one, just getting the equipment on the ground, but then two, testing what else works. And I don't want to overpromise, but from one of the first questions was, can you do anything beyond signs only? This technology, we believe, has the potential to add additional applications. And the big question here is, with some of the switching moves and unique things that happen at this crossing, how does the technology perform compared to a crossing where trains just go straight through and don't stop, don't slow down? This is something where it's obviously more complicated, but we are seeing successful implementation in other communities where not only are signs put up to tell the public what to anticipate, but that information can potentially also be integrated with emergency service responders to help them understand where are trains, how long will they be there, and potentially could even become some sort of data feed to real-time applications where you could use your smartphone to tune in and just check traffic conditions and integrate that railroad information into it. So those latter steps are big steps beyond this initial pilot that we're talking about. But I think it's something that if the technology does do what we think it has the potential for, you could see a phased pilot study that happens not only for that first year, but potentially extending beyond that.
Thank you, Chris and Curtis and Tim, for adding to that response. The next two questions are going to go to Tim, but we'll take them one at a time. They're real questions. Has the project team been in contact with BNSF since the buyout of the Montana Rail Link with regard to this project?
Yeah, so this timing of this study and timing of at least what has been in the news as far as the potential releasing of the leasing rights from Montana Rail Link back to BNSF is very interesting. So to answer that question directly, we have not been in communication with BNSF, and the primary reason behind that is to my knowledge, anyways, is that the potential lease agreement or giving back of the lease agreement that Montana Rail Link has with BNSF is going to a federal board of regulators to review, and so it's not approved yet. And so still the coordination on this type of project has been through Montana Rail Link up to this point.
Thank you, Tim. And Christy, I'm going to make an assumption on this next question. If I'm wrong, please write me back. So the question, Tim, is how can we, and I'm going to assume we mean stakeholders at this point, encourage the railroad to consider making it a railroad project, not a public roadway project?
Yeah, very similar to any other questions or concerns about railroads and the crossings across the state. You can reach out to Montana Rail Link or BNSF and have a conversation or provide input. It has been stated very clearly that, especially with the operations, with the yard, with the industry tracks, that there's very limited, if no options at all, for making any improvements or changing the railway that would have much of a benefit to this, just because of its proximity with their operations. And so, it's that balance the study has had to take with a lot of input provided to date, that it's trying to improve safety and mobility of the public, while at the same time not impacting operations of the railroad. And so it's kind of the balancing act of benefit cost, and that sort of thing. So at this point, it is a non-starter to have the consideration of movement of the railroad up or down or around.
Okay, thank you, Tim. For the information for our attendees, excuse me, we only have 2 more questions on deck. So if you've got questions, type them up and send them in. The next question is for Tim. Have there been any studies of the blight that grade separation options would create?
We have not seen any specific studies. That is a great question. Has been a part of feedback that has been received, especially as we look at some of those, have reviewed some of the long-term alternatives in past meetings. I know there's definitely some theories, and there's been some presentations across the country and even recently in Billings about walkability and some of those, and how some structures can create some of those problems or negative impacts. And so if anybody listening has knowledge of any studies that have been done, please send them to the team, because it just provides some good information for us to be able to have considerations as we have looked at those. I did want to kind of refocus though, based on feedback we have received, the study does include those long-term alternatives with an overpass or an underpass, but there is a direction or a decision to really focus in on keeping the crossing at grade, looking at things with signals and technology to move forward. And the purpose to leave those in the study is, maybe a long ways down the road, the community does decide it's time to potentially look at one of those more capital intensive types of projects. And so those options, we want to keep those in the study to know what was looked at, but there's not a decision to move any one of those options forward for long term. The focus is now looking at keeping the crossing at grade.
Thank you, Tim. We have another railroad question. Is the railroad opposed to restructuring their scheduling to pass through town at less busy times?
So to our knowledge, there is not, and to our knowledge, there's also not an ability for that, simply based on their role of moving commodities, and it's more of schedule driven with traffic across their entire rail line, coast to coast, and not as much of scheduling railroads based on 8 o'clock morning traffic or 5 o'clock evening traffic.
And Tim, you got a big thank you and a smiley face. So lovely. The next question is, who made the decision to keep the crossing at grade? And Alan, I'm going to assume you mean the roadway at grade and not the rail. So if that's incorrect, please write me and let me know. So Tim, why don't you take who made the decision to keep the crossing at grade?
You bet. So after our last public meeting where we really focused in on a lot of the long-term alternatives with the overpass or the tunnel options, there was quite a bit of feedback, both pros and cons, some in favor, some not in favor. And it really boiled down to the collaboration on the project team between the Montana Department of Transportation, the city, and city council as key stakeholders, providing that feedback, on behalf of the community that it was not in the best interest of the community to move one of the long-term alternatives forward at this time. And so that's why we went back and focused in on the short-term alternatives and looking at technology and updating for this 4th round of public meetings that we have today.
Thank you, Tim. So we have no open questions right now. I'm going to ask, we got another question. Hang on one second. We've looked at creatively designing an overpass to actually enhance the city, but that's been unpopular by many. Have you looked at other communities globally to see how they have addressed the issue?
Yes, we have. There's lots of examples in the United States and across the globe where there have been various parks created underneath overpasses. There has been, potentials for walking trails, even like art exhibits where the ability to showcase kind of some local artists with some of their information or some of their creativity, as well as just aesthetics of the structure itself. This is also true for an underpass or a tunnel option where an upper deck, if you will, kind of replaces the roadway and really kind of creates more of a walking mall type of feel, kind of a shared street type of feel, while traffic that's wanting to get through is actually going underneath the railroad and underneath that created cap, if you will. There's a project, I want to say it's in the Boston area, and it's called the Cap, and it's parks and kind of neighborhood feel of that. Not as much room to do that in the downtown core of 27th Street, but yes, absolutely looked at various opportunities for aesthetics, make it look nice, actually enhance the view shed instead of detract away from the view shed for the various long-term alternatives.
Okay, good stuff. Thank you, Tim, very much. I'm going to take a small break and ask Curtis to wrap up the meeting. I think if you end up having other questions, please go ahead and get them in and we will answer them. I'm not trying to cut off anybody's ability to ask questions. If you have other questions, go ahead and put them in the QA and send them to us, and we'll take care of those. In the meantime, I'd like to give Curtis the last word, if you will.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. I just want to conclude by saying a thank you to the consulting team of HDR and Kittleson. We appreciate your efforts in this study. And a big thank you to all of you who have taken time out of your busy schedules to join us today. Your ideas and comments are very important to us and an important part of this project. Bottom line, public involvement makes our projects better. So we appreciate you participating in this process. And If there are no other questions, I want to say thank you and have a great day.
All right, and it looks like, Curtis, there are no other questions. I wanted to take 1 second to thank Janine, who is our lieutenant in running these webinars, so I really appreciate that. Have a lovely, lovely afternoon and a safe weekend, and thank you all for your time. We're going to close the meeting down now.